This is Defiance Daily, dispatches for the Defiant. I am your host, Miles Taylor. We have shocking new information today based off of a CNN report that suggests that maybe the feds were already watching Alex Preddy, the man who was killed this past weekend in Minnesota, the protester who was murdered by agents of the Department of Homeland Security. Were they already following him? Recent reports indicate that he was known to authorities. We'll get to that in a moment. But then also a major shakeup at immigration agencies. Greg Bovino, who's become the face of Donald Trump's immigration crackdown, has been removed from his position, has been sent back to his old job. Tom Homan, the White House border czar, has been sent into Minnesota to take over. And there are rumors of a bigger shakeup in the Trump administration. And amidst all of that, the fallout of this weekend's shooting continues. We will talk about that today and more. Our special guest is someone who has seen it from all sides. His name is Patrick Skinner. He served as a CIA operations officer focused on counterterrorism and has a lot to say about domestic terrorism. He served in the Coast Guard. He served in the Capitol Police. He served as a federal air marshal. And now he's a local cop with a perspective on community policing and what's happening with the Trump administration. This is Defiance Daily, dispatches for the Defiant. We begin today with new reporting from CNN that adds important context to the death of Alex Preddy in Minneapolis and challenges the narrative surrounding his final encounter with federal agents. This from CNN. A source who requested to stay anonymous out of fear of retribution told CNN that about a week before he was shot and killed, Preddy came in contact with agents when he saw federal immigration officers chasing what he believed was a family on foot. He stopped his car and blew a whistle to alert those around him. Those same sources say multiple federal agents tackled Preddy during that encounter, leaving him with a broken rib. He was not arrested. Now, the Department of Homeland Security says it has no record of the incident, but CNN also reports that federal agents in Minneapolis had been instructed to collect photos, license plates, and personal information on protesters and observers, even when no arrest was made, and that Preddy's name was known to federal authorities before his death. It remains unclear whether agents recognized him during the fatal encounter. What is clear, however, according to CNN's reporting, is that Preddy had previously tried to stop what he believed was harm being done to others. The new details raise fresh questions about how federal agents are tracking protesters and how that information may be used. Let me bring into the conversation my Defiance.org co-founder, Xander Schultz, to talk about this. Xander, look, just quickly, before we jump on to the next story, we don't have full details on this yet, but it would be pretty shocking if the feds already were watching Alex Preddy because of, again, clearly First Amendment protected activity and maybe targeting him because of it. Oh, you're on mute.
It's the kind of day we're having, folks.
It's one of those days.
It's one of those days. Right away. It's shocking if you compare it to, I don't know, other kind of historical analogies domestically. But if we are comparing the Trump administration to authoritarian regimes throughout the world, you know, the Putins of the world, the Xi Jinpings, et cetera, then it feels right in line with what you would expect from those folks. And I think what we're starting to see is the slow unveil of a presidency and an administration that's operating much more akin to a Putin than, you know, any of his predecessors.
Yeah. Well, look, and, you know, whether or not the feds were watching him is, you know, an open question. But the fact that they had already had an encounter with him and that police had been directed to be collecting this information on locals and protesters, even if they weren't arrested, that's very, very concerning. I mean, this goes back to an incident that happened before Alex Preddy's death, which is that video that went viral last week of a woman filming federal agents and being told she was going to be added to the terrorist watch list for doing this, that she was going to be added to domestic terrorism databases. You put all these pieces together, again, I have to emphasize, like, these are not one-offs. These are not disconnected incidents. You've got a trail, a paper trail that goes all the way back to last fall of the Trump administration saying, we are going to designate the political opposition as domestic terrorist organizations. We are going to call them Antifa, and we are going to go after people who have anti-American, anti-capitalist, and anti-Christian views. This remains a sweeping unconstitutional order that's still in effect by the administration, and clearly the departments and agencies of the federal government are following through on it. And what we are seeing in Minnesota is part and parcel of that larger directive.
It feels like it's one of two things, neither good. Either they are directly targeting guys like Preddy because they feel like there's some threat and they're watching them, et cetera, or their abuse and monitoring is so widespread that they're hurting all sorts of people. And it's not rare if you're part of the resistance in Minneapolis to have broken a rib or been pushed over or had some terrible experience with these guys and be in their database. So neither is a good sign.
Well, look, I'll say this before we move on, Xander, is, I wrote about it this morning over on our site, defiance.news. But this is not the Department of Homeland Security that people like me went into government to help build. And I'm sad to say it, but my comment this morning was, I spent most of my adult life trying to help build and mature that department to protect the country against cyber attacks and terrorist attacks and foreign spies and people who actually want to do us harm. But now I think it needs to be dismantled. DHS needs to be completely detonated and rebuilt from the ground up, because once these types of abuses of power happened, they can't just be fixed with personnel changes. It sets a precedent. And a big reform effort is going to be needed after all of this.
Miles, can I ask you, this is a genuine question. I wasn't thinking about asking this, but now that you say that, there was a debate for a long time in American history on if we should have intelligence departments in general when we're not in wartime. And that tradition of tearing them down after wartime ended after World War II because we immediately entered into the Cold War and it was in this foggy place. Is it a war? Is it not? And we kept our intelligence departments up. But the fear was always that it would be turned inward. Those capabilities would be turned inward during peacetime. And as you're talking about tearing down DHS and the value of that organization, when you were a part of it, thinking about kind of external threats and how it's being utilized now, I just wonder what your reflection is on that. I know Eisenhower, when he passed, said he had regretted not tearing down the intelligence departments. I just wonder what your take is.
Well, look, this has been something that's been grappled with since America's founding. America's founders were worried about a standing army, right? They were worried about those national security functions existing in peacetime. But you also see examples throughout history like Pearl Harbor, where we had done this after the First World War. We had taken apart a lot of that infrastructure. There's a famous comment by a former early American intelligence official who said, "Gentlemen do not read other gentlemen's messages," when asked if he was intercepting the notes of our adversaries that could have helped us detect things like Pearl Harbor. And so there's a balance to be struck there about making sure that you have those intelligence and law enforcement functions in peacetime, because in this day and age, you may think you're in peacetime, but a single guy planting explosives on his body to blow up an airliner might not think it's peacetime, and you've got to be ready to detect that person. But I think what it ultimately comes down to, Xander, with the Department of Homeland Security is that these other departments and agencies, the Department of Justice, which has the FBI housed within it, the Department of Defense, myriad agencies all throughout DoD, they've had years and years and years to mature to the point that there is rigorous congressional oversight and there are extensive layers of laws creating more accountability in those places than the Department of Homeland Security has been able to have. And this is something that critics said after 9/11, is that this young department was liable for abuse. And I'll give you a concrete example. Even though none of these places are perfect, clearly the Department of Justice is being politicized right now. But it's been a lot harder for Donald Trump to take over every facet of the FBI because that institution has so many layers of accountability and not nearly as many politically appointed jobs. At DHS with ICE, there are fewer layers. It's easier to manipulate. It's an agency that has fewer checks and balances. That's the type of thing that we need to focus on. So as we look to the period after Trump is in office, there's going to be a question about whether the immigration agencies need to be more like the Fed. Now, as we know, the Federal Reserve Board is being targeted for political purposes, but it is easier for the Fed to maintain its independence because it's not housed within the Department of the Treasury. It works with the Treasury, but by law, it's got this independence. It's got this independent board of governors. And importantly, people are appointed for multi-year terms that outlast specific presidencies. There's somewhere in that a model for how to manage immigration enforcement in the United States. But unfortunately, that's probably a conversation that happens years from now.
Right. Well, thanks for sharing that, Miles. I think you had unique insights on that.
I appreciate it, brother. Well, I'll say this before we move on. If folks don't join us tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern, you're going to miss an announcement about something else that's going to be done on all of this. Xander, myself, the rest of the defiance.org team are very, very proud to be teaming up with officials around the country to help them fight back against federal overreach. So tune in for that announcement tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. You may hear more about it during the day tomorrow before that broadcast, but we'll bring you the full story here on Defiance Daily. So please like, share, and subscribe. You can sign up for our updates for free at defiance.org or at defiance.news. Now we move on to the shakeup, the big shakeup that has been happening. Since we were last on air, major changes have hit DHS operations in Minnesota. We go to local Minnesota CBS News syndicate WCCO for the breakdown.
Major changes amid the federal crackdown here in Minnesota. Here's a look at the latest. The Trump administration will soon have a new point person on the ground here in Minnesota. Sources tell CBS News Border Patrol Commander Greg Bovino has been reassigned, and Border Czar Tom Homan is arriving to the Twin Cities. Homan has decades of immigration enforcement experience. He also served in the Obama administration. President Trump says Homan will report directly to him. According to the office of Governor Tim Walz, he met with Homan this morning. The two agreed on the need for an ongoing dialogue. Another main player in Operation Metro Surge is facing redirection. DHS Secretary Kristi Noem was at the White House on Monday facing questions about her department's handling of Saturday's shooting. That's according to CBS News sources. Those sources also say Noem is facing anger from some inside her department over the public statements following the shooting. So far, she is expected to keep her job, but her focus will shift from interior enforcement operation to securing the southern border, among other priorities. Dozens more congressional Democrats have agreed to join as co-sponsors of legislation to impeach Noem.
Now, while people do appear to be shifting around the Department of Homeland Security, we want to take a moment today to hone in on one very important detail in today's program. We will not be fooled by the optics. No matter the musical chairs beneath it all, everything is still the same here, line by line. It's very clear that Donald Trump is trying to save face while keeping all the core elements of his immigration crackdown and his broader domestic terrorism crackdown in place. What you have not seen is Trump say he's going to change his immigration enforcement to stop targeting people who've committed no crimes, which is what he's doing, even though he sold us on an administration that was going to focus on criminal aliens. 90% of the people being picked up by ICE right now are people who have no criminal record, nor did he say he was going to rescind his executive order on domestic terrorism. Again, this is musical chairs, so don't lose sight of what's actually happening. Now, as discussed, Donald Trump met with the DHS secretary for 2 hours yesterday. I will tell you, that's an unusually long meeting in the Trump administration. That's an unusually long time to be sitting with the president of the United States. Anytime we were in meetings that lasted more than 2 hours with him, he was red-faced, he was angry, he was yelling about something. Now, this, of course, is leading to buzz that perhaps the DHS secretary has not only fallen out of favor, but that she might not be in the job for very long. Today on the tarmac on his way to Iowa, Donald Trump continued to praise Noem, however, ensuring the press that she would not be stepping down and that he thinks she is doing, quote, a very good job. Now, while there seems to be an attempt to delineate between Secretary Noem and Greg Bovino, the record of the people says it all. Last night, CNN released a perfect side-by-side comparison of the two's remarks. And guess what? They're one and the same. Take a look.
An individual approached U.S. Border Patrol officers with a 9mm semi-automatic handgun.
The officers attempted to disarm this individual, but the armed suspect
he
violently
resisted, fearing for his life and the lives and safety of fellow officers.
An agent fired defensive shots. Medics were on the scene immediately,
Delivered medical aid to the subject, but the subject was pronounced dead at the scene.
This looks like a situation where an individual arrived at this scene to inflict maximum damage.
Where an individual wanted to do maximum damage and massacre law enforcement.
This individual went and impeded their law enforcement operations, attacked those officers, had a weapon on him, and multiple dozens of rounds of ammunition, wishing to inflict harm on these officers, coming brandishing like that and impeding their work that they were doing.
So whether it's Alex Preddy or a few weeks ago, Renee Nicole Good, who was killed by federal agents, you had DHS Secretary Kristi Noem and Greg Bovino saying the same thing. Also, I would note, in both of those episodes, you had the leadership of the department coming out before there was any evidence, before there was any indication of an investigation being opened, and saying that the people that they had shot were domestic terrorists. They had effectively pronounced them guilty of a crime when both of their bodies were cold and neither of them were able to respond. But unfortunately, the evidence came out anyway, and we were able to reach our own conclusions about whether those two individuals were indeed domestic terrorists. But I will say this, it's not just about Greg Bovino. It's not just about the Secretary of Homeland Security. This goes to the top. According to Axios, the claim that Preddy wanted to, quote, massacre federal agents was dictated to the Homeland Security Secretary by none other than Stephen Miller, the White House Deputy Chief of Staff and President Trump's top immigration advisor. Four sources told Axios Miller personally directed that language. Sources say Miller was told Preddy had a firearm and instructed DHS to frame the incident as an attempt to attack the agents. That language appeared in a DHS social media post just over 2 hours after the shooting. Some White House officials had not approved the statement before it was released, and Miller later publicly called Preddy, quote, an assassin. That description was repeated by Secretary Noem and Border Patrol leadership in Minnesota. You draw your own conclusions about where this guidance is coming from. Now let's go to the death of Alex Preddy himself, because today Donald Trump tried to toe the line when discussing Preddy's murder and the investigation. Take a look.
Do you believe that Alex Preddy's death was justified?
Well, you know, we're doing a big investigation. I want to see the investigation. I'm going to be watching over it. I want a very honorable and honest investigation. I have to see it myself.
Honorable and honest. Not exactly the words that you would use to describe how this has all played out so far. We learned today that the Justice Department has decided not to open a civil rights investigation into the fatal shooting, following the same lack of responsibility by the office in the review of the murder of Renee Good. Instead, the investigation will reportedly be handled internally by the Department of Homeland Security, including a Customs and Border Protection unit reviewing its own officers' conduct and Homeland Security investigations examining whether Preddy broke any laws. According to MS Now, FBI involvement was limited. Evidence gathered at the scene was turned over to DHS, excluding firearms and casings. While Minnesota state investigators say they are being denied access still to federal evidence. Current and former investigators spoke to MS Now under the guise of anonymity and flagged one very crucial point. As they noted, it's alarming the way the evidence was handled and removed from the scene, including Preddy's firearm. They note Preddy's gun was pictured on an officer's car seat and used by DHS in a news release just hours after his death, stating that he had been armed, but that it did not appear to have been properly bagged and photographed as evidence. The potential fouling of the chain of custody means the investigation is already somewhat tainted, and the gun might not be used as evidence in any trial. Well, we wrap this story by noting that today in Arizona, a U.S. Border Patrol shooting is under investigation, another one, adding to growing scrutiny of federal immigration enforcement nationwide. According to Reuters, Border Patrol agents were involved in a shooting Tuesday in Arivaca, Arizona, about 10 miles from the U.S.-Mexico border. Local officials say one person is in critical condition. The individual has not yet been identified. The Pima County Sheriff's Office says it is working with the FBI and CBP to investigate. The The Department of Homeland Security did not immediately comment. Let's bring into the conversation our guest today, Patrick Skinner. As I noted at the top end of the program, Patrick's the perfect person for us to have this conversation with. I first got to know of his work when he was in the U.S. national security community, a former CIA operations officer who has extensive experience in counterterrorism. But Patrick, a Renaissance man, a man of all trades, has also worked in the United States Coast Guard as a U.S. Capitol Police officer, as a federal air marshal, and now in Savannah, Georgia, where he is a police detective. Patrick joins us today. Welcome to the program, my friend, and welcome back, Xander, my co-founder.
Thanks for having me.
Patrick, appreciate you jumping in here. Look, people don't understand this, but there were a lot of geeks in the U.S. national security community that were big fans of yours during what was affectionately known as the GWOT, the Global War on Terror. You've done it all. You've seen all of these things. I want to first get your impression of the term domestic terrorism and how it's being used lately, because there's a lot of people who, quite frankly, are now coming up in the United States who weren't even politically aware during the war on terrorism debates about the specific definition of terrorism. And now Donald Trump has brought it back into the public lexicon by accusing political opponents of being terrorists. We're hearing this so much from the Department of Homeland Security during this immigration crackdown. I just want to get your reaction as a former counterterrorism professional to how this national conversation is playing out.
Well, I mean, anytime you use the word terrorism, it's like you're using a nuclear weapon, a nuclear bomb during the conversation. You just want to, I mean, that's as extreme as you can get when it in terms of domestic policy, certainly. I mean, I was in the counterterrorism, CTC, the Counterterrorism Center with the agency, and we were focused on legitimate foreign national terrorists. I was in Al-Qaeda, the group, countering that. And so that term applied. And even then, sometimes you'd see it get stretched foreign, to insurgencies would become terrorists, and then, you can blur the lines, but when you're actually fighting, you probably don't really care about the labels. So overseas, it's one thing, but it's probably even overused there. But then domestically, oh, good Lord, there are domestic terrorists, sure. There are. I mean, there are violent people around. I see them all the time. But to label anything as a domestic terrorist is, as I said, it's a nuclear bomb. You are going to the extreme. And then you're making somebody argue that, no, I don't support a terrorist, blah, 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 blah. And so it's a rhetorical device, but it's also, unfortunately, driving policy. I mean, if you're labeling your political opponents as terrorists, then they're not opponents, they're enemies, and you can do what you want with them. We had excesses in the global war on terrorism with legitimate terrorists, and now when you start using the word domestic terrorist because you object to their First Amendment speech, we're well beyond a slippery slope. We're off the cliff now. There's no slippery slope. It's insane, but it's deliberate.
Off the cliff. I can't disagree with you, my friend. I'll throw it over to Xander for a question, but let me toss one in there as well. Maybe we'll combine two of them. I'm curious to get your perspective now. You're on the other side. I know everyone asks you this all the time because you've seen it from the front lines of the global war on terror with the CIA. You now see it with, working with a local police force and see what community policing looks like. I wonder what you make of the tactics being deployed by ICE and CBP in Minnesota, and whether that approach to policing is combating the potential for an inflamed situation, or whether it's fomenting it. But Xander, do you want to tack a question on top of that?
Oh, let's have him answer that one, and then I'll follow up.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even think it's a police tactic. I think what they're doing is anti-policing. I'm a homicide detective now. I'm around violence, and it's almost always guns. And so I'm very familiar with this threat and what they're doing. I mean, I wrote about this, it's almost 5 years ago during George Floyd in a series of Washington Post articles where I said, look, this is how I fought the war on terror. Is I refused to do that in the war on crime. And I thought it was really bad in 2020. But what the feds are doing now, same administration, different year, is they're going so far beyond. It's now, I don't even know what to call it. It was deliberate. I mean, all it is, they're seeking to create a reaction to divide even further, to go for the excess, and then point out and say, and see, everybody here is a domestic terrorist. George Floyd had legitimate protests, and there were legitimate, actual, not legitimate, but actual riots. I mean, there were riots, and there's a big difference between riots and protests. And what they're doing, there are no riots in Minnesota, Minneapolis. Those are protests, and they're pretty peaceful protests. I mean, I see them here too. And what they're doing is they're deliberately trying to incite, in riots, or they can do the Insurrection Act. And I never try to pretend to even know what people's intentions are. I just go by their actions. But here they're telling you, they're flat out saying, we want this to do, we want, elected officials are saying, do the Insurrection Act, do this. And so what it is it's anti-policing. I see people with guns all the time. Georgia is a constitutional carry state. My personal opinion is it's crazy. Only in America do we think guns have nothing to do with gun violence. But that's the law of the land here, and the vast majority of people that carry guns are not criminals, or at least they're not violent. And so I see them. We deal with people with guns all the time. And so, but here they went at this person. Well, they went at the woman first, and then they went at this guy, and then they tackled him, beat him, and then shot him. And at some point we have to say why.
Yeah. Patrick, I'm just going to back up a step. You have used and wielded the tools that America has at its disposal to go after terrorists. If those are turned inward, as someone who's always sat outside of Washington, doesn't really know what we're up against, what do everyday Americans need to know if those tools start being weaponized internally?
I think they already are. And some of they have been for a while. And, in terms of like surveillance, and I'm not talking about targeted surveillance. I'm talking about like, blanket metadata, that type of stuff. But I think that people need to be to understand that our government is lying to us a lot, and there is you can argue that every administration is dishonest to a certain degree, certainly disingenuous maybe, but not like this. This is not a both sides issue. This is a criminal organization. They're telling you they're doing this. I mean, this is nothing like this is not apples and oranges. This is apples and uranium. It's just not even. There's no comparison. But I think what people can do is to not be afraid. I mean, that sounds weird because what we're describing is terrifying. I mean, I think about it a lot. But I think that filming the police is the most American thing you can do. And as we're seeing, it is also the most effective thing you can do. I don't want people violently confronting cops. I'm a cop. If there's a riot in Savannah, I'm going to be the one getting my butt kicked for a while too. I don't want police officers hurt. I am a police officer. I don't want anyone hurt. And that also, and when I say anyone, I mean anyone. And so I don't really recommend like getting in a police officer's face. I wouldn't do that. But that's not what's happening in Minnesota. There, the police are getting in their face. They're coming up to people who are filming, which is, I mean, not only is it constitutional, it's not threatening. There's nothing wrong with it. I mean, people do it all the time to me, and we always have body-worn cameras on. Even as detectives, if I'm talking to somebody, I'm going to have a body-worn camera on, and I tell them, I'm filming you. You should film me. Do whatever you want. I don't care. And so I would suggest film as much as you possibly can. Try to avoid drama, which most people do. I'd say avoid drama, but the problem is the ICE, federal law enforcement, which they're not, they're bringing the drama. They're coming. You can see it. When I walk up to somebody as a police officer who's not doing anything and I push them down, there's not much you can tell that person to have avoided, except you hear people say, "Stay, you should have stayed home." Well, that's not, one, that's illegal. Two, it's un-American, or at least it used to be, and it's insane. And so I would recommend, I would film everything. I'm not afraid of being filmed. I mean, I'm not afraid of my face. I should be afraid of my face. I'm disgusting, but I mean, my name is Patrick Skinner. I mean, and so I know it's gross. And so, but I'm so used to that job.
I don't know, Patrick. I think you've got the perfect ethos and look for the job,
Yeah,
man.
totally.
Like
Totally.
you scream counterterrorism in law enforcement. We need that. I want to pin you down on one thing on the gun issue. I'm glad that you brought it up, and I want to note a story, and then I'll play a clip, and I want to get your reaction on the back end. But this has obviously become a confounding aspect of this whole thing, and it's sort of mixed the politics around the Second Amendment. And PBS has got this story that we were going to talk about next today about Alex Preddy's killing and how, gun-owning representatives and leaders across the country have been denouncing the White House narrative around Preddy's death because they're not only talking about the First Amendment, they're going after the Second Amendment. And, according to that article, GOP Tennessee caucus leader, Representative Jeremy Faison, said plainly, quote, showing up at a protest is very American. Showing up with a weapon is very American. And then Trump today managed once again to put his foot in his mouth on the issue of the right to bear arms. And so we're going to play that clip. Apologies, the audio is kind of poor, but take a look and we'll get your response on the back end.
Well, that being said, you can't have guns. You can't walk into guns. She can't walk into a gun. You can't do that. It's a very unfortunate sentence. We'll work something out.
So you can kind of hear him say there, you can't do that. You can't walk in with a gun. You can't have a gun. So not the case. I mean, as information came out within hours of Alex Preddy's death, Patrick, I was thinking this guy could have easily been Nate, not just because had kind of a bad beard and, wore fashionable clothing, but he had his concealed carry permit and he was in public with it. Why else do you have a concealed carry permit, if not to be able to have a weapon on you peacefully? And Xander made a good point yesterday. Just because you have a concealed carry permit doesn't mean you leave your home with intention to go hurt someone. But that's what federal law enforcement officers were saying about this man before there was any evidence, saying, well, he had a gun on him. Clearly, he meant to come harm federal law enforcement. That's really offensive to gun owners, regardless of your political affiliation.
Yeah, I mean, it's offensive to everybody. It's also illegal. Literally, a lot of people have pushed for unlimited Second Amendment rights. I mean, I think we should have more restrictions on guns, but I understand, that I am in the minority. I'm just tired of having them pointed at me, but I get it. And I'm actually not too worried about, people that are legally carrying guns. I'm not. Now, if you involve alcohol and stuff like that, that's a winning combination. But yeah, and actually carrying concealed is actually less dramatic and less confrontational than open carrying, because you see people open carry with rifles at Starbucks, whatever, those stupid scenes where they're provocative. They're doing that to show I'm exercising my right, which is great. I mean, fine, I don't care. But then to say that this guy showed up with a gun that nobody knew of, and they feared for their life because of a gun they did not know about, and then ran up to him and then pushed him down. They're lying. They're lying, and they're either poorly trained and incompetent, or they're still poorly trained and intentionally hurting people. The guns. That's a separate issue, but it's funny how so situational it is, and almost everything in America breaks down. Right and left. Well, now it's good and not good, but yeah. So now people are saying, wait a second, you can't really pick and choose, even though a lot of people have been picking and chooses. A lot of gun control laws came about in the 60s and early 70s in California because of Black Panthers said, hey, the Second Amendment applies to us too. And people said, oh, we don't want that. So here it's kind of like, well, wait a minute. And President Trump said, you can't have guns. Now, that might be a common sense thing. The Tennessee elected official, whatever he was, said it's very American to show up to a rally with a gun. And I guess that's correct. It's a terrible statement, but it is correct. And there should be nothing wrong with that, as long as they're not brandishing it, because they even used this term when they were trying to smear Alex Preddy, that he was brandishing. Brandishing is that's a legal term. You have to have it out, and you have to be not just, you don't want to be pointed at somebody because then you're getting into an ag assault, but you have to be doing something, saying something, putting someone almost in reasonable fear of immediate apprehension, blah, 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 harm. But it's funny because now that people are focusing on the gun. And I understand that. And again, I've arrested people where they've had guns and guns fall out, and luckily I have bigger people behind me that can handle it. But the gun is just one issue. It's an important issue, but that's not why they shot him. The whole thing is what happened. Why did they walk up to this person and push him down? And they walked up to this person and pushed him down because he was filming them and because he got in between them and a woman. You saw the video. They pushed the hell out of that woman. I've never done. I've literally never done that. And so they did more aggressive stuff and illegal and out of policy stuff in that one call than I've ever seen in 9 years as a police officer in a violent town. Savannah's kind of violent.
Patrick, I want your perspective before we let you go here. I want your perspective as a police officer. Miles and I were speaking earlier in the week how bizarre it is that non-police officers kill someone in a city and then they rope it off and tell the police that, hey, this isn't your jurisdiction. This is our scene, despite not being police. If you're what would you like to see from police? Let me broaden the question. What would you like to see from police if you're confronted with this? There's non-police federal officers killing people in your city. It feels like a bizarro world to me that there is an arrest immediately following that somehow those guys can, cosplay as police and corner off the crime scene from the real police. And I think we're all looking for, this is what we've been working on a lot here, seeing the local leaders that are tasked with protection helping us in some way. And so I kind of want your broad commentary and your personal reflection on what that would look like for you.
Yeah. And let me just chastise Xander because, dang, I wanted to ask that question. And Xander got to ask that question. You are a homicide detective, Patrick. And it's not lost on me that Savannah and Minneapolis are kind of comparable, cities in a sense in terms of, size and the broader, population out in the extended communities. If this happened in Savannah and you as a homicide detective, would you expect that federal authorities would say, don't worry, we got this. We're going to do the investigation into our own people? No, it's weird. So we have shootings. Like if a police officer shoots anybody, and I think it applies everywhere in Georgia, the Georgia Bureau of Investigations take over. We don't investigate ourselves. Atlanta police don't investigate the show. So the Georgia Bureau of Investigations, GBI, handles it, and they lock it down, but we maintain the control, the crime scene, stuff like that. And so, that's all I do is we do crime scenes, we do murders. And so, like if somebody is shot and they have a gun, I give training and I tell the responding police officers, unless you have a real good reason to pick that gun up, and the only good reason is somebody's trying to take it from the crime scene, leave it alone. A gun on the ground is not going to fire itself. I don't care if it's raining, just leave it alone because we need to see that if, was there a round in the chamber? Was it, slide back? Was it empty? Whatever it is. However the condition of it when the person dropped it or fired it. I feel bad for the local police because you're not really going to go against the feds. You're not. They're wildly out of bounds because the 10th Amendment basically says that all the powers are given to the state. Feds come back to the states, and local law enforcement is one of those issues. They don't have the ability to, or the authority, or the right to enforce local or state laws. They can only do federal stuff. And so when they're like taking guns and taking the person out of, I could see moving somebody if it was a riot and you have to get off X. I get that. I understand that. But again, that is not this. I feel bad because I don't know how you would go against the feds. They're standing there, they're their own little army, and I don't know what you're going to do. Get in a gunfight with the feds? No, but that's where protocols are supposed to be, where working relationships and stuff. But they don't have working relationships. ICE is now just telling people we're going to do this stuff, and that's not how that works. Minneapolis police. They run the local law enforcement in Minneapolis. That's why it's called Minneapolis Police. And so for somebody to get shot and killed, even if it's a fed, you still have to slow everything down and freeze it, just lock it down. And you saw the street. It wasn't like chaotic and people running. There were sporadic people, infrequently around the street. But I've never seen that before. And there's a reason why we've never seen it before, because it's insane. The feds aren't supposed to do that. And
I don't know how the locals would stop them, but the whole point is the federal government isn't supposed to act the way it is, and it's terrifying.
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't want to see them in a gunfight, but I think a lot of Americans would like to see them try to enforce, try to enforce the situation and let the feds like just these homicides being important that they're on tape. It'd be great to have on tape the feds having to actively resist the police trying to investigate.
Oh, I mean, I think that they should be having conversations on body-worn camera, and then you know they don't want if the Minneapolis is not investigating that crime, well then they can immediately, there's no open investigation, they can immediately release that body-worn camera and say, this is what the Fed told me, that he was going to physically take it from me, and I'm not going to get into a gunfight on the street because I'm a mature adult, unlike the person threatening me. And I mean, I think body-worn cameras, they're not a panacea, they don't solve everything, but man, they help a lot. I mean, we just saw 2 Americans killed, and the government lied flat out about it. And the only reason we know about it is because of cameras. The police, well, hey, we have cameras too. And so if somebody's doing something illegally, I don't care if they're a Fed or anybody else or another cop, whatever, they're going to be on camera. And I think that, yeah, the local police are in a bad position because you really can't go up against the Feds, but you can sure make it painful for them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Patrick Skinner, we are thrilled that you were able to join us today, my friend. Thank you for your insights. I hope you'll be willing to join us again in the future. Just terrific to have your expertise here on the program and for all our viewers.
Sure. Thank you for having me.
One thing that I'll note, Xander, is, what was so helpful to hear from Patrick is just that validation from someone who served in federal and local law enforcement that the recording should not be confrontational. That should be so obvious that someone can record that interaction with law enforcement, and it's a two-way thing, and that builds trust. I mean, it's kind of a trust but verify thing. Is there should be trust there, but we're protecting the ability to verify what happened. The police are doing that, so we should be able to do the same thing. And what we've seen in Minnesota really just validates that in the most tragic way.
It's unbelievable. Well, what a guy, Miles. Thanks for bringing him on. He was fantastic. I completely agree. It was fantastic to hear his perspective as a former intelligence leader and also as a current police officer. And man, if most police thought and spoke like he did, man, we'd be in a great place as a country. It was beautiful to hear him even champion the cameras and how they make the job better. It was so nice to hear so much of what he was saying.
Google him. Read the Atlantic article that they produced on Patrick. This was like 7 years ago. He's probably going to say that was out of date. They wrote a really great article on Patrick and his transition from being a spy to working in local law enforcement. Hopefully we can have him on again, especially because I'm sure these issues won't totally disappear. Xander, in the interest of time, because you and I have to go hard out in a couple of minutes here, let's jump to some questions from our audience. And just to let folks know, Mom and Dad here have been cranking hard all day. We've been working really hard to try to do some good things, and we're so grateful for all the support that we've had from the defiance.org community, and we hope that tomorrow we can put something else out into the world that will help deal with this issue. So let me take a few questions from the chat. Gene says, could you give us the name again, please? Yes, our guest was Patrick Skinner, Skinner. You can Google him and find a great article written about him in the Atlantic. And we're hopefully going to have him back because that was really useful to get his insights. I had about 1,000 more questions for him if we weren't on the clock. Sass Writer asks, which one of you is mom? I think it's probably Xander.
I am from the West Coast. I am the hippie from the West Coast. It would make sense. It's the easiest for me to transition out of the two of us. It's all right.
Perfect. No debate, no disagreement. The relationship is good. It's solid.
I'm comfortable with that.
Yeah. Alice asks, is there an update on Constitution delivery? Yes, there is, Alice. We shot an email out about this. I hope you got it. It should be from me somewhere in your inbox there in the past couple of weeks, but we are going to be delivering those constitutions, if you ordered one on defiance.org, to Congress on February 24th. This is the day of the President's State of the Union, the first State of the Union that he will be doing since he's back in office. And we've got a special surprise that morning for how we're going to deliver those constitutions to members of Congress. So we will be communicating that with all of you. Trust me, you will not miss it if you're watching our program in the days leading up to the State of the Union and watching some live broadcasts that we announced that morning. We're going to make a splash with those deliveries. So we cannot think of a better day of the year to remind members of Congress that they swore an oath to that document and not to a man than the day that that man tries to come up to Capitol Hill and convince them otherwise. So, and Xander, I suspect you and I will both be out there for those deliveries.
I might not take a frog suit off after that day. I'm just excited to be in my frog suit in DC, running around. And it does feel like it'll embolden me to deliver those constitutions with fervor. I'm excited.
Well, and that is a great reminder that, of course, that night, folks, we are also hosting the State of the Swamp, the rebuttal to the State of the Union. So that's going to be a great event. We've got even more speakers that are being confirmed for that event. I think I'm going to be able to send out an email with some additional speakers confirmed later this week. The incredible Ruth Ben-Ghiat has also committed to joining the program. So Ruth will be there. I know a lot of you are followers and subscribers to Ruth. She's an incredible best-selling author, expert on authoritarianism, and someone who's been truly a lucid voice in these times. So Ruth will be there as well. We've got some other speakers to announce. So check that out at defiance.org/SOTU, SOTU. Let me see if we've got other questions here in the chat. I don't know if, Xander, you caught any. My screen whips
Sarah
up and down.
asks, what is the National Guard supposed to be able to do then in regards to, ICE and them claiming to have authority in these places? That's some of what we're working on. I don't want to, I don't want to scoop ourselves before we announce this thing tomorrow. That's somewhat what we're working on, is what can local officials in general do. But I think, what I'd like to see more of is what I said to Patrick, which is like, push a little bit so these guys reveal who they are. Like, these people recording ICE, why they're so important on top of the documentation is when they're abused, ICE is revealing who they are and undermining their arguments and their authority and their credibility. The same thing could go with our elected officials, local elected officials, sheriffs, police chiefs, local security leaders, etc. You might not win that fight. And Mike Schmidt mentioned this when we brought him on, the Portland DA as well, that the DAs are not used to bringing cases that they'll likely lose, but that's not really the point here. We need to eventually start winning, but what we want to see is these different leaders across these different roles try and record the effort of them trying. So ICE and the Trump regime are continually revealing who they are and their willingness to stomp on all norms and gaslight everyone on the reason they're doing things. And so you'd love to see more of that, even if the actual kind of, hierarchy of who's in charge is one way or another, or they're likely to lose an effort. That's what I would love to see. Just more of that from our local and elected leaders.
Yeah. Second that. And, the other thing that I would add on the National Guard is, look, they are there to help restore order if things get out of control, but certainly not to get into a war with the feds. Now, the worry here is there were a number of war games that were done in the lead up to a second Trump administration by a number of different institutions. I participated in a few of them that were bipartisan. They were Republicans and Democratic officials and independents, people who'd served in multiple presidential administrations, national security officials. And the reason war games were held was not as some sort of deep state anti-Trump thing, but because people knew that Donald Trump would attempt to aggressively deploy federal forces across the country. And people needed to play out, well, what will happen if that goes down? And how do we prevent that from spiraling into a literal civil war? And I'll tell you, some of those exercises that I participated in, it got very, very dark. You had people who played these roles in real life, playing them fictionally. And situations like we are seeing in Minnesota are very similar to how some of those scenarios started to happen, where states felt like the rights of their citizens were being encroached. Police forces came into contact with federal forces. Things potentially got violent. and they spiraled. And then you had in those war games, Donald Trump invoking the Insurrection Act and sending U.S. troops in, and governors feeling compelled to protect their people from an invasion of U.S. forces. It gets very bad if that's the series of events that happens here. And we're not talking about fiction anymore. We have a president of the United States who is warning he's going to invoke the Insurrection Act, and state leaders who rightfully want to protect their people and their constitutional rights from obvious violations. I mean, I just saw, Xander, a report this week that one journalist has documented 2,300 cases of judges ruling that ICE had illegally detained people. 2,300 instances of ICE breaking the law in their detention of people just since last July. So, like, the governors see this and they say, look, people's rights are being violated systematically. They've got to do something. But all a long way of saying, we've got to figure out how to prevent that spiral. And at least right now, the tiny bit of good news this week is it looks like Trump is blinking first and potentially considering dialing back some of what's happening in Minnesota. Does that mean they're changing immigration policy? No. Does it mean Donald Trump is changing direction on designating the political opposition as terrorists? No. But this respite, this brief moment, this pause might create the conditions to prevent things from becoming catastrophic.
Yeah, and shout out to Renee Good and Alex Preddy and all the brave people in Minneapolis who, by confronting ICE, drove down the popularity of what President Trump was doing, forced ICE to show their hand, forced the regime to show their hand, and are making him take a few steps back. And okay, maybe I can't just go full steam ahead now. I'm facing resistance, and that resistance is being shown to, is showing the American people we are who they say we are. So shout out to all those brave people in Minneapolis who have been, facing down authoritarianism in -20 wind chill. It's actually absolutely incredible.
Totally. I mean, gosh, would people have had that same level of bravery in Florida with better weather? I'm not sure. I mean, I think this really all speaks to the toughness of the people of Minnesota in so many different ways. I mean, they are representing the nation. Before we go, on a light note, I don't know if Mercedes has this, but someone requested the video of me running around in a frog suit, and I will say that we will have some frog suits at this event on February 24th. So if you're coming in person, especially if you bought one of those packages to get a frog suit, we're very excited to see you suit up with our friends, the Portland Frog Brigade, who are going to be co-sponsoring that event with us. Also, Courier News. If you don't follow Courier, these guys are rock stars. They are like, the next new media ecosystem developing, and they're focusing importantly on the local level. They're not just trying to be TikTok influencers. They're building the local news outlets of the future. And that's why we're thrilled to partner with them for the event. That's why we were thrilled to make them a grantee the other week and to help with their efforts to deploy in battleground states in the lead up to the election, so that real information about the election gets to voters in these critical battlegrounds and not the lies that are coming out of the Trump administration. So there's that. I don't know, Sass Writer, if we have that video of me as a Portland frog. Mercedes says no, but don't worry, there will be frog content. You won't miss out. No
shortage of frog content coming.
No shortage. That's all we have for today, folks. We hope you'll join us tomorrow. Every Wednesday is our weekly mission briefing right here, 5 p.m. Eastern. We are going to be announcing this week's efforts to push back against the Trump administration's abuses of power. You don't want to miss it. Am I right, Xander?
You're right.
That's it. That's all I wanted to hear. We're going to clip that and we're going to run that in a loop. We're just going to, every time I finish the segment, we'll just go, you're right.
I'm new at TV, Miles. Give me a break.
You guys are fantastic. Everyone, we appreciate you as always. Thank you for being with us. Stay loud, stay brave, stay together, and we'll see you tomorrow night.